Hi guys, this is going to be a basics of 3ds Max tutorial. I'm going to be explaining the very beginner parts of using 3D software, 3D modeling software. So that's why if it sounds like something's quite obvious, I am explaining it just for the people who may or may not know this. So yeah, I'll just get straight in. For the purpose of showing you what all these different viewports mean, these are the 4 viewports: the top, front, perspective, and left over here. I've just dragged in a teapot down here. It's quite self-explanatory. The top viewport shows you the model from the top. The front one shows it from the front. By front, it means the front in the perspective here. So this little box here says front on, it means there. And then the left-hand side over here, which is the left on this little square here as well, or cube even. So yeah, a little basics thing. This is how you drag around the 3D space with this kind of like cube scroller type thing. Another thing you can do though that I've been doing is you can move around the 3D space by clicking in the mouse scroller and just holding it and moving around. You will probably need to do this at some point, so that's how you do that. But yeah, so I'm going to get straight into showing you how to edit polygons, edit meshes. So I'm just going to delete this teapot because it served its purpose now. I'm going to click on the box here on the create panel, and I'm just going to drag in using the left hand click, just a cube. So you drag in the base and then you scroll, like you let go, and then as you're scrolling up and down, not scrolling, as you're moving your mouse up and down, it determines the height there. I'm going to click on the select and move tool on the top left up here, and I'm just going to be able to move it around now. So as you can see down here, as I'm moving it, those numbers are changing. So that's just saying where it is respectively in the 3D space. So I can use this scroller down here as well. But yeah, another useful thing is if I right click on these scrollers, it sets it all back to 0. Which is really useful if you're modelling something and you want to, edit. This is just a really useful way of setting everything back to 0 in case you've kind of like flown something off to the side like that and you want it to be exactly on 0, because it helps when you're exporting your meshes out at the end. So yeah, that's how you set stuff to 0. What's next? I'm going to cover like the insetting and extruding and basically editing this little box to make it more interesting. So first thing we need to do is make it an editable poly. So I right click on it and then go down to the bottom and convert to an editable poly. So now this drop down menu selection comes up. So now we can get into all of these interesting things. But first, I apologise, I do have a cough today, so I'm sorry if that's really loud. But yeah, if I click on this drop down menu here, it comes up with all these guys. So Vertex or vertices are these little blue dots here. One other thing that I'll just put on now. When you first open 3ds Max, this is how it's set up. It's set up to show you the default shading of the 3D model. However, I always like to right click on it and go down here to where it says edged faces and just select that, because then it puts a line down all of the edges for you and it just makes it a lot easier to kind of edit. So yeah, that's just a little tip there. Edged faces, always on. But yeah, so if I'm working in the vert panel here, I can move these vertices individually. And you always move along the X and Y and Z axis if you want to. I mean, it just gives you a little bit more kind of like control over where stuff's going. You can be more uniform about it. If I say on the y-axis there, it'll only move it along the y-axis, so it's really useful. If I grab this kind of thing in the middle, I can just send it anywhere, and it can go a little bit wild, and it's just, yeah. Unless you purposely want to do that, I just would ignore that. But yeah, I'm going backwards by just pressing Ctrl-Z like you would in any other software. Next is the edge selection, which is quite, self-explanatory. It's when you can grab the edges, so that's really useful. But yeah, border, you're never going to use that probably, so I'm going to skip past that. Polygon, this is where you're grabbing the faces. Oh, sorry. So You can grab the polygons one at a time, or you can press Control and select more than one, etc. But it's just really good. While we're on this, it's a good way of making, you know, if I've got this, kind of cube here, if I wanted to make it into more of a rectangular cube, you might want to kind of like do it by just dragging the face up. Another way you could do it is, we've got the move selection tool on over here, but the other two next to it are really useful. So they've got, if you click here, you've got rotate on. So if I click this face, and then I can rotate the face like that, or I can press Ctrl Z and select the whole mesh, and I can rotate the whole mesh like that. The same thing with the next one, which is the scale tool. I can scale the whole model like that, or I can go on Polygon and I can scale the different polygons. So that's super useful. Always scale in the middle here if you want it to be uniform, because if you scale just on the Z-axis, for example, it just does it on the Z-axis. You know, you can do it kind of like in the middle of two axes like that, but have a play around with stuff like that. But usually you tend to just use the uniform one in the middle here. Cool. So what next? Let's go on to using the Inset tool. So now you know what all of these, the move, the scale, the rotate do. I'm going to click on this face here on the polygon selection, and I'm going to inset it. So inset's really useful if you're doing stuff like windows or doorways or anything like that. It's just a useful tool to use, because what it does is it creates a nice even quad, depending on what you're insetting, I suppose, in the middle of your polygon. So now I've got this nice little square that I can move around, which is great. It also automatically does it, if you're working in quads already, it'll make it into a quad. I'm not sure if you guys know already, but you should always be working in quads or tris. Tris are 3-sided polygons. So these are all 4-sided, but tris are 3-sided like triangles. Quads are 4-sided. N-gons is a word we use for any polygon that has more than 4 sides, more than 4 edges, and you want to avoid them at all costs because they are just awful, and it'll give you texturing problems. You won't be able to unwrap your meshes, you won't be able to import them into Engine properly. So always make sure you're working and all of your polygons have 4 or 3 edges. It's going to be something that you will forget about and mess up on, but try and get into the habit straight away of making sure everything you create has 4 edges. If you're doing it if you're not cutting corners and you're doing it in a kind of like a sensible way, you shouldn't come to this problem, because as you can see, when we created this square in the middle of this box, it automatically cut these edges to these verts here for you, so that it was, 4-sided. Right. I feel like I'm going off on a tangent there, so I'm going to move on. So I'm going to grab this polygon. I'm going to show you how to extrude. So maybe I want to, create a bit that's popping off the edge here. If I press extrude on the settings panel here, this scroller comes up. Sorry. This scroller comes up, and you can make stuff go outwards like that, or you can also inset stuff inwards, which is super useful if you're creating, like a window. You can create like a little window ledge or whatever, or if you're making maybe a crate. So that's very useful. Another thing you can do, if I just press Ctrl Z and get off all of these. Come on. There we go. If I select more than one polygon by pressing Ctrl as I click them, and then press the inset settings, it will inset everything at an average, which is super useful if you're making like a corner for a room or something. Like it's great. However, you can go and change it from group selection to by polygon, and that's also really useful because now it's insetting all of the polygons at the same depth. So if you're making a crate, for example, it's just dead useful. Another thing you can do before you press tick, before it kind of concretes that, you can press Ctrl and click on other faces, and it'll apply that same inset to whatever face you select. Likewise, if you've selected one you don't want to select, you can press Alt and deselect stuff. So that's just really useful to do. So yeah, but always remember, once you've done and you've selected all of the ones you want to select. So for example, if I'm making a crate there, just make sure you tick it off, because once you've ticked it, that sets it, and that means it's done now. But before you press tick, it's not done anything. So remember to do that. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to extrude these inwards a tiny bit, just to show you how you might go about creating a little wooden crate. So I've just dragged those in a little bit like that. And now you've got a very basic kind of wooden crate type thing, like very, very easily. One thing I will show you while we're here is if you do extrude stuff too far back, you'll get this weird black, dark, kind of like flashing mess. And that's basically 3ds Max saying, whoa there, you're overlapping your polygons, which you don't ever want to do. So if you're ever extruding stuff or doing anything and it comes up dark and shadowy like that, you've done something wrong. So stop and press Ctrl Z. But yeah, so I'm going to leave that like that and press tick. And yeah, so that's how you use the inset and extrude. I'm going to press Ctrl Z again and make it go back to just being a normal square. So I'm going to show you a couple more things we can do. If I go onto the edge selection, I want to put maybe a slice down the top. If I want to put an edge in here that's like uniform and down the middle, say I want to cut this into half, I can go onto the front panel here, select with my box selection here, like that, and as you can see, it's selected all of the edges in that area. And now I can go down to this connect setting down here, and if I click the settings bit, as a standard, it's usually set to 0, 0, and 1, but it puts a nice seam just right down the middle of the cube or whatever it is that you're creating, and it's super useful. You can also maybe put 2 or 3, or, you know, and you can do it on the other side as well. I can just press that, and it'll do it the exact same way as whatever you did on the last time you used that setting. So that's useful to do as well. But it likewise, I can just change it back to 1 or 2. So that's always good. Or maybe 4. But yeah. So I got this weird little edgy cube going on now. I'm just going to show you now that we can use something called the Hinge tool. So this is really useful if you're, well, it's just a very useful tool to do. So I'm just going to put some edges in here by connecting it real quick on the edge. I should have done this before. Oops. All right. Okay, cool. So now we've got like a Rubik's Cube looking thing. But if I go on to Polygon selection, I'll show you what the Hinge tool does. So I can select this polygon here and say I want to create a hinge or a pipe kind of that's coming off the edge. For example, if you're doing like a cylinder and you're creating a pipe for some like sci-fi environment, it's super useful. So I'm just going to go down here and press this setting where it says hinge from edge. So click settings. And it doesn't look like it's done anything, but that's because we haven't chosen the edge yet. So if you go onto this tool here and then select the edge that you wanted to hinge from, I'll select this one. There you go. It's creating a hinge on this edge here. I can click onto a different one like here, and it'll do it there instead. Or I could do it from this one and it'll do it there. But as you can see, I'm going to click this one just here. And you can make it hinge out more like that. You can add in more segments, which is super useful. Woo, sorry. And it just creates kind of like it creates a really perfect little, well, hinge or edge or whatever to come off. So that's really useful when you're doing environment work or if you're doing cars or anything like that. It's a really useful tool to use. And if you just press tick, that becomes that. So that's really useful. And it, as you can see, like I've moved that forward there and it looks a bit crazy, but it's all nice and connected. So that's real good. I'm just going to show you quickly another thing that's useful. So you might not know what a spline is, but a spline is basically like a line that you can create. You might have heard of them from Photoshop and stuff like that, but I'm just going to go down here. Oh God, sorry. And I'm just going to go on to... This one is standard primitives, which has all the boxes and the teapot and stuff on. And if you go next over, you can create splines. So I'm just going to click line here, and I'm just going to, you know, create like an S, kind of like a wiggly shape there. There we go. So it's a bit weird looking, but if I go now back onto my box here by clicking on it and go on Polygon and select this polygon here and then press Extrude along Spline, and then select the spline and click this one, it'll create a very crazy looking extrusion, but along the spline. All I need to do here is just add in a bit more of these to make it look a little bit less crazy. And you know, I can make it thinner or thicker. If I tick off it, you can see that the spline's a bit nuts. So if I go back here, just delete that spline. Ooh. Sorry, and just put a new one in. I'll just do one like that, just to show you, because I probably should have done it this way the first time, but oh well. And again, go on this polygon here, extrude along spline. Oops, sorry. Select the spline, and it'll just do, yeah, you know, it'll just create an extrusion but along an edge. So it's really useful for again doing pipes or doing, I don't know, like just anything that you think you can make a better edge with, like tree branches, anything like that. So this first scroller is the amount of segments it puts in. You might only want a couple like that. This next one down here, is how it'll be set to 0 as a standard. Is how like kind of like tapered it is. So you might want it like going inwards like that, or it might need to be like a chubby kind of one. But if you just set it to 0, that's usually what you work from. There's other things you can go on as well, like how thick it is at the end and whatever, but I usually just set all these to 0 when I'm using it, because I'm usually doing something like that. So yeah, that's how you extrude along a spline. I'm trying to think what else. Oh, I'll show you how to bridge things as well, because that's real useful. So you might have created this weird looking object and think, wow, that's beautiful, I wish I could copy and paste it, and you can. So I'm just gonna, if I click on the y-axis with the move tool and then hold down shift, hold down shift and then click on the y-axis and just drag it along, I now have 2 of these, you want it set to copy, not instance, by the way, 2 of these lovely weird looking box things. Maybe I want to attach these 2 things together. For whatever reason, I might want to create some kind of like tube between these 2 that attaches them together. So first, if I click on this, these are 2 very separate, you know, objects at this point. If I click attach and then click onto this guy, it'll make them one, and then turn it off. It'll make them one thing. So now, if I select this face here and this face here, and then I can press the bridge settings, it'll connect them together. And that's really useful, you know, just for being able to connect 2 parts together. You can do it on more than one edge. As long as they make sense opposite each other, you can bridge them like that. And it'll put all of the edges in for you, and it'll do it all properly. Another thing that's quite useful, if I just press that there, and this one, which is opposite, and I press delete, maybe for some reason you've got a hole in one of your meshes, I can select this edge here, which is just on that end, and I can select the same one over here, and I can press bridge, and it'll bridge them together like that. And then you can do the same thing on the top and the bottom. If you've not got you don't necessarily need to do that, but sometimes you might have a problem where you need to fix a model that you might have broken, so that you can just basically do it from the edges as well, not just the polygon faces. So that's always good to know. I'm trying to think anything else while we're here. No, well, actually, in fact, one other thing that's quite useful to use, sorry for the coughing again, I'm just going to delete that spline. You can, if you've attached 2 things together, elements, these are still two separate elements. So I can delete that element over there, and this just becomes the singular one mesh again. So I'll move that back over here. Sometimes you might not want to grab the edges like we did, like that, to add in geometry. You might not want to just connect something like that. You know, you might want to add in a very specific cut. So if you go over here onto the freeform modelling, and not on freeform, just on modelling, and go on to edit, there's a tool called Swift Loop, which just puts in a loop wherever you like, basically. It's quite good for just chopping stuff up. It's not as accurate as using the connect, but sometimes it makes more sense if you've not got a square, like a cube or whatever. It's just a good one to pop in. It's really quick, so you don't have to kind of like go through and grab everything. I'm trying to think of anything else. Another thing that might be useful is if you go onto Vertex, say you've accidentally created, if I go onto this edge here and delete it, that now is an n-gon. Like I mentioned before, it's got 1, 2, oops, sorry. It's got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 sides, which is just not ideal. So you might find on your mesh that you've got an n-gon going on and you want to fix it. So you can go onto this, on the vertex selection, you can grab this vertex here, press Control, grab that vertex over there, and just press connect once, and that'll fix it completely. And now you've got quads again. Alternatively, you can, if that's not possible, you can go on to edit and cut. So it's a little bit, I wouldn't recommend using this unless you really have to, but as you can see, as I move this around the edges, it's making different shapes. So this kind of square with the spikes coming off it, you don't ever want to do that because that'll just create weird geometry down the middle. You might want to do that for whatever reason, but if I'm trying to cut this here and connect it to this one here, can you see it's making that very small little box? So if I click now, and then I cut it over to here and make sure it's on the other small little box, and then right click to deselect it, that's how you do that. But you know, you might want to, if you want to do it along an edge, it will go thin and flat like that, and then it'll kind of just put in a random polygon there, and it does try and clip it to whatever vertex it feels it makes sense to. But I would avoid using the cutting tool until you're a little bit more well versed with 3ds Max. But yeah, that is just the basics of all the weird different little things that you can do. So now you can kind of experiment and practice at home with all of these different techniques. So yeah, cheers guys, thanks.